courtside of the virtual hardwood, it's the NLSC Podcast, a weekly show for basketball gamers and hardcore hoopheads. This is episode 556. I am Andrew in our forum, Andrew NLSC on X. Joining me as always, my co-host Derek, DV3 in the forum, and DV3G and DV384 on X. Derek, as always, lots of fun stuff to talk about this week, so please, tip us off.
So first, we will discuss a perfect segue into one of our main topics, an NBA Live 18 revenge session, where Andrew did not take our original loss against the CPU very well. This will lead us into a trifecta of community questions. One of them is, what is the most devastating loss that you have experienced in a basketball video game? Followed by two closely related questions centered around, what is the worst take you have seen or heard related to real-life basketball and basketball video games? So first, I want to let our listeners know, Andrew and I have connected to play co-op for many years now, and I have never seen him this annoyed about a loss. He was so annoyed that he messaged me multiple times in less than 24 hours asking me if I was free to run the game back. In one of his last desperate messages, he tried to motivate me with words that could have only been straight out of a movie. He said, "I know we can get the W."
Yeah.
A quick backstory before I throw it over to Andrew. Andrew has really been feeling NBA Live 18 lately. He has been playing the one and has spoken fondly about the gameplay. So naturally, I asked Andrew if he wanted to get a co-op game in on NBA Live 18. Andrew was pumped about this, so we were off and running. I chose the matchup. We were going to use the Jazz with Donovan Mitchell, Ricky Rubio, Joe Ingles, Rudy Gobert, Derek Favors, and surprisingly, a fun ISO Joe on the bench. And I matched us up against the CPU Nuggets with Jokic, Jamal Murray, Beasley, Wilson Chandler, and the incredibly underrated Kenneth Faried. So we hung in there until the fourth quarter, where we had a monumental collapse, especially in the last few minutes, and ended up dropping the game. Andrew was very unhappy with his performance. You were honest about that in our Twitter chat. And I'm almost certain that he was kicking himself until we were able to get that revenge game in. So, Andrew, why don't you tell us about that first game and your thoughts after the loss?
Well, yeah, as you said, I've been playing a lot of NBA Live 18. I was feeling very confident in my abilities on the sticks, being very familiar with that game at the moment, but I wasn't accounting for that little bit of online lag that I have connecting to you on the other side of the world. So I was trying to make some moves that normally I would make very easily, and I wasn't making them. And I was also trying to guess and input a little bit early. That led to a couple of pull-up jumpers that were supposed to be gathers in for dunks and layups, so I messed up a couple of plays there. Also, there are two on-ball defensive triggers, defensive assists in Live 18, one that will stick to the ball handler and will also follow the ball to the new ball handler if a pass is made, and there's one that just is the traditional stick to your man. So I was using both, and when I didn't switch between them, I'd run off my man when they passed and leave them open. So I was making some defensive errors, wasn't quite as sharp with my moves as I wanted to, but I still knew that we could win that game. We still had those great moments. The chemistry is there with us. We played so many games together, as you said. So yeah, I just wanted to run it back, man.
And we did. So first off, I want to point out that Andrew wasn't the only one who had a bit of a collapse in the fourth quarter. I was gambling for steals. We went down by 6 or 8 to start the quarter, and in an attempt to try to get us back, I started gambling on the ball handler. And what happens when you gamble on the ball handler at the top of the key in NBA Live 18, Andrew?
Yep.
They go straight to the hoop.
Right to it.
Right? They attack the rim. And if we're not, covering defensively, if we don't switch to a big guy in time in order to cover that drive, oftentimes they'll score. And they were. So Andrew and I connected again today, and we did the exact same matchup. The only difference is that I chose playoff atmosphere as opposed to regular season, so maybe that hyped us up.
Of course.
Who knows? Maybe we fed off that crowd. We were at home, so we were in Utah. And we held them, I want to say, to 4 points in the first quarter, 4 or 6 points in the first quarter, 6-minute quarters. Our defense was ridiculous. It was stifling. Gobert had 8 blocks in the game. and we were playing much better offensively. Our rim attacks were better. We were picking our spots better. We were posting up favors and taking advantage of his mismatch down there and scoring and whatnot. I felt like we were 10 times better in the revenge game, and we ended up beating them pretty convincingly. I think we ended up winning by 15 or 17 points in that second game. And I think that you were satisfied. I think that you got it out of your system. We were able to avenge that terrible loss, and it made you feel a lot better.
It certainly did. I mean, I'm not done with NBA Live 18. I'm sure we will connect again and have even more success. But that was definitely satisfying to get revenge there, to get the win, for sure. And I've advocated for NBA Live 18 on the podcast and in recent articles. I posted the Monday tip-off, the wasted potential of NBA Live 18. I truly do believe that. I believe they had something good there, a good blueprint to build on, a good balance between the NBA side of things, the new streets, the street side of things as well. I've been enjoying that, but also there's a great amount of NBA content as well, NBA-oriented content. Ultimate Team still was lagging behind what my team was doing as far as having a bunch of sub-modes, but was still very fun, and the only place you could play with Legends in NBA Live 18, which is another matter entirely. But the potential was there, and they went in that different direction with Live 19, leaned more into the streets. I think was a huge mistake. Now, NBA Live 18 certainly has its problems, and I will readily admit that. There are still janky moments, still a bit of heaviness to some of the animations, some canned moments. The trajectory of missed shots, the ball coming off the rim really hard, doesn't really feel natural. Some of the transitions between animations, not very smooth. But when something works out really well, Derek, it looks fantastic. You had a great move with Donovan Mitchell, sizing up the defender, spinning baseline, going up for a one-handed jam. How awesome did that look?
So first off, Donovan Mitchell is excellent in that game. You messaged me a couple times about that on Twitter. It's like Mitchell is really good.
Yeah,
like he's quick. He's a lot of fun. He has a shot that feels pretty good. His dribbling is fast and effective. His moves are fast and effective. He throws it down a lot when you attack the rim. He has acrobatic layups. Donovan Mitchell's excellent in that game. And I agree with you. I think that when things look good, they look really good. But when things look bad, they look super dated.
Yeah.
Right.
Agreed.
And one of the things that really bugs me about NBA Live 18, and it's a problem that's also in NBA Live 15, 16, and 19, is swinging it around the perimeter it feels terrible. It's a nightmare.
Yeah.
The passing animations are so heavy. The catching animations are also sometimes heavy, but those passing animations are so slow and delayed that it feels piss poor. So I'm not a fan of swinging it around the perimeter in that game. I'm not a fan really of the passing system in general in NBA Live 18 or NBA Live 19. I also think that there's a lot of canned finishes. I feel like more often than not, when you're driving to the hoop, while something can look incredibly good, it just feels like everything is random, right? Like if there's a dunk, the game is just going to decide to give you a dunk. And as opposed to in, some of the NBA 2K games, or even in some of the past NBA Live games, you can do more of a passive drive, right? And you can make it so you're going to do a reverse layup instead of a dunk. Or you're going to do a finish that's not trying to, throw it down. So I think that there's a lot of randomness, it feels like, to drives to the hoop. And I think that that's one of my problems with NBA Live 18 and NBA Live 19. But, as you stated, when something looks good, it looks really good. We had a couple pick and rolls in that second game where we timed it perfectly, where the drive happened and then the roll happened when it should have, and the lob was thrown and it was caught perfectly by the receiver, and he threw it down, and it was textbook, right? There was a play where I was double teamed with Donovan Mitchell in the fourth quarter of the revenge game, and Joe Ingles popped out to the corners. I know you remember this play, and I found him immediately, and he took that mid-range jumper, and the net exploded, right? Yeah. That looked awesome. There's also sequences where you outlet the ball, and their player keeps moving towards the basket. The ball finds him, and he goes in for a layup or dunk, And that entire sequence, the rebound or block that led to the outlet, that led to the basket, looks good. So I think they were doing a lot of good things with NBA Live 18. I think that my two biggest issues with it, I'd say, well, the three biggest issues with it is the passing mechanics, the overall robotic nature to some of the moves in the game, which absolutely impact feel, and just the amount of canned moments, the amount of times where you feel like you don't have control. But the game is good enough for us to have a blast, right? Like, you can't tell me that we didn't have fun in that revenge game. We were having a blast. We were in the chat on Twitter talking about it. There were just a lot of great things that happened on the court.
Definitely, and I absolutely agree with those criticisms. That was holding NBA Live back. It didn't have the impact, especially after a couple of years off, that it needed to have. It still needed that polish. I know that's become very cliche to say, but yes, NBA Live on that generation needed more polish. It needed more authenticity to the movement, to the realistic feel and fluidity of the animations, because you do need to make that great first impression, because obviously we gave the game a chance and we can see the good points and work with some of the roughness, but as we said before, you need to make that great first impression, and when you do have that roughness, that doesn't always happen. You have to have gamers being very open-minded about it to give it a chance, as we did. And I'm glad that we did. I'm glad that it's become part of my rotation. Even with the servers offline, it's a shame to lose Ultimate Team, but the Prime Tour is still there. And that second game, again, very satisfying. We would have won by even more, but we were trying to make some highlights, I feel, in the second half. And made some good ones, and certainly made some great highlights there, but as soon as we realised we were getting a bit sloppy or getting a bit ambitious, we buckled down and started playing seriously again, and playing within the flow of the game, and it worked out. So we're pretty good with our chemistry there.
Yeah, I agree. I think there was one play in the fourth quarter that I really wanted to complete, and it was that alley-oop to Donovan Mitchell where he tried to windmill it.
Oh, yeah.
Like, he tried to catch it and windmill the throw down.
Yeah.
And it got tipped, but I was so excited when he started to go into that animation, because I was about to be like top 10. Like, that's easily going to the top 10. But it got tipped and it didn't complete. I also want to say that Jokic in NBA Live 18 does not have a face scan.
Yeah,
and
that's terrible.
It looks absolutely nothing like him. But when you look at guys that do have face scans, you can see that the quality is there. Right, like a lot of the faces look good. For example, Rudy Gobert, like, his face is spot on. It looks exactly like him. But yeah, Jokic, he doesn't look good in that game.
And what an interesting pairing of teams that you chose. As I say, I always love the choices that you make whenever we play in your hosting. But yeah, that Jazz team, they didn't go very far. They weren't ultimately successful, obviously, and Donovan Mitchell was eventually moved on to Cleveland. But yeah, what an interesting assortment of players. And yeah, ISO Joe there quite randomly. I'd forgotten about that.
So the 17-18 Jazz went 48-34, and they actually lost in the Western Conference semifinals to the Rockets.
That's right.
And they lost that game in 5 series. And if you remember correctly, that's the James Harden, Chris Paul Rockets. In that series, James Harden averaged 28 points a game and Chris Paul averaged 24.6. So they were really carrying the load there in Houston. But that Nuggets team, this is a very young Jokic and Murray, Andrew. And to prove that, they actually had a worse record than the Jazz that year. They went 46-36 and missed the playoffs. And you see that what numbers Jokic is putting up today. Well, these are the numbers he put up that season. So he played 75 games. He was age 22. Like I said, this is a young Jokic. Jamal Murray was only 20. But Jokic put up 18.5 points, 10.7 rebounds, 6.1 assists, and 1.2 steals on 49.9% from the field. Those are amazing numbers, but that is pedestrian compared to what he's putting up now.
Yeah.
Right? So, but it shows you how young Murray and Jokic were, and that Nuggets team didn't even make the postseason.
And how fun is it to go back to an old game? And I say an old game, it's only 7 years old, which is actually a long time in basketball terms and NBA terms, obviously. But to see the young version of a team that won the championship in 2023, and they have a couple of key players there in Jokic and Murray, just going back and seeing their younger selves playing with that young version of the team. Obviously, a lot of players have changed since then. They are the two that are left over. But again, how fun is that to play these interactive almanacs, to go back and see that young version of the Nuggets?
I love it. And, we've talked about it before, but basketball video games are a look into basketball history, right? And it is cool to use those players and teams on, the virtual hardwood. And if you look at that 17-18 Nuggets team, the only remaining players left over today are Jamal Murray and Jokic. Everybody else is gone, right?
Out of the league sometimes.
And, yeah, exactly. And for the Jazz, I don't believe any of the players from NBA Live 18's default roster are on the current Jazz roster. So it's crazy how fast things change in today's NBA.
No, for sure. It's crazy how quickly things change, or how quickly time seems to pass, as the case may be. And to that point, one final point about NBA Live 18, something that I've really enjoyed about it becoming a retro kick for me, and it's not that retro, obviously, but to that point, a lot of my retro kicks have been much older, discovering games from the mid-2000s. That's been fantastic to add those to the rotation, to retroactively become all-time favourites. But I really enjoyed developing a new love, a new appreciation for a game from the past decade. And NBA Live 18 has always been one of my favourite games from that generation. A lot of low cards in that hand, obviously, Derek, but I appreciate it even more today. And it's been fun to have a more recent game become a retro kick.
Yeah, I think that I get those feelings every time I play NBA 2K19, right? Because it's around the same time. And, it's a game that came out 5 years ago, but I really only developed a true appreciation for that game years after it had already been released, right? And that's when I also seriously started modding it and whatnot. So I definitely see where you're coming from. And still, NBA 2K17, 2K16 are part of my rotation, 2K14. I also want to say, before we move on to another one of our main topics, the way that Andrew and I connected on NBA Live 18, I just find it fascinating. I find it unique. I find it amazing. So Andrew and I live on opposite sides of the world. He lives in Australia. I live here in the U.S. It takes me about an hour to get to the TD Garden if I wanted to watch the Celtics. So that's where I'm located. And we connected via Parsec. So he connects to me on Parsec. And I open up the Xbox app and I stream my Xbox One console to my PC. And that's how we play. His controller works, my controller works, and we, hit the virtual hardwood running and we get our games in. That's also how we've been playing NBA Jam on Fire Edition. And I record our action using my Elgato. So I have 3 applications running while we're playing. I have Parsec, I have the Xbox app, and I have Elgato. And I just find that fascinating, Andrew. It's just the fact that we can connect on these games, living on opposite sides of the world, for it to work good enough for us to have a great experience, for me to be able to share that footage. I mean, we dreamed of this.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And it's just awesome.
And to put it into perspective, Derek, the approximate distance between us is about 16,000 kilometers, almost 10,000 miles. So that's crazy.
Yeah, we won't be visiting each other in person anytime soon, but we can get our fix using Parsec and whatnot on basketball video games.
Before we go on, a reminder that the NLSC podcast comes out every week on the NLSC, nba-live.com, as well as our YouTube channel. We're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast apps. If you're listening on any of those apps, we'd greatly appreciate a review. To keep up with the show and everything we're doing with basketball gaming in general, connect with us on social media. On Twitter and Facebook, we are the NLSC. We also have an Instagram, NLSC Basketball, and on YouTube, we're youtube.com/NBA Live Series Center. Once again, visit us at nba-live.com, where in addition to the podcast, you'll also find all of our original content, as well as our forum and modding community.
So, Andrew, our NBA Live 18 experience, especially how you felt about that loss, had me thinking of this community question. So I asked the community, basketball gamers, what is the most devastating loss you have had on a basketball video game? And just to let our audience know, honestly, I've taken many L's in my decades of playing virtual hoop, so I really can't pinpoint one. Andrew, I don't know if you have one that you can, that stands out to you.
Well, I do actually have a recent one, as it happens. I mentioned it on a previous show. I had the 66 game winning streak going in my career. Season 6 of NBA 2K14, my career. Looking good for 82-0 for the first time in my career. I've had a couple of 81-1 seasons, so that was the new goal, to go 82-0, obviously. Just have an undefeated season, do the whole Kareem at UCLA run, basically. And I got sloppy in a game, and against the Grizzlies, of all teams. They're not doing very well in the 6th season of my 2K14, my career. And I never turned it on in the 4th quarter. I let the game remain too close. I was messing around. I was saying, oh, well, I can just turn on the Jets at any time and just speed to victory, and I let it slip. And there goes a 66-game winning streak. Got to start over again in year 7 to go 82-0. I obviously try to go undefeated the rest of the way, but yeah, totally blew it. And the worst part about that was on me. I didn't execute. I got lazy. I got sloppy. I got cocky, overconfident that I could just turn it on in the 4th quarter and breeze to victory, and I didn't. So that was definitely a recent example. And the other one that I'll give that is devastating, but also I appreciate, and this is another one that I mentioned before, Derek, when you beat me with that half-court shot with Michael Finley in our fantasy teams session of Live 10, playing with makeshift retro teams, devastating, but I'm glad to be a part of that loss, because that was an incredible play.
I think that hurt you too, because it was kind of a lazy turnover.
I messed up,
yeah, you messed up. But, I mean, that's probably the greatest game we've ever played.
Oh, yeah.
Against each other. So
absolutely.
It turned out to be this epic moment. It's unfortunate you were on the losing end, but you also played a great game up to that point, in my opinion. Like, the game was epic overall. I also want to point out that letting off the gas thing, that happens in real basketball too. I've been on many local league teams, many men's league teams, where we've been up by 15 or 20 and we just kind of got lazy, right? We started, not being as aggressive. We started changing our shot selection. We started slowing the pace, all of that stuff. And I've lost men's league games due to that. Not me personally, like letting off the gas, but like our team in general, right? Doing that. And sometimes those are just like the worst losses, because that you were the better team, right? You knew you had the better players. You know that if you had stayed locked in, you would have won that game. So yeah, it happens on the virtual hardwood and the real hardwood.
Seen it in real life. I feel a lot of teams these days get a bit lazy, just start launching threes and let the other team get back into the game. And of course, as you say, at the local level happens as well, and pick up and organised local leagues. So it's definitely a thing where you get overconfident and stop trying as hard as you need to.
Yeah, you've also said to me a couple times over the last few years, Derek, does anybody in the NBA know how to close out a game? Do any teams know how to close out games anymore? Because how many times have we seen teams blow leads in the 4th quarter, right? Or make stupid decisions down the stretch to let another team back in it and win. I think that's one of your biggest pet peeves, I would say, probably about the new product, about the new NBA, is just how unorganized and how lazy teams seem to be down the stretch.
Oh, absolutely. And you've got this game, and the classic snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. Absolutely. And not noticing that you're letting the lead slip away and deciding, okay, let's settle things down. Let's use up some more clock. Let's stop taking threes. Let's get a few easy buckets to maintain the lead. And of course, that influences the virtual hardwood as well. Playing online in the rec, you see a lot of gamers that you are matched up with randomly and teamed up with randomly when the game appears to be in hand, but is not totally in hand. There's still enough time to let this win get away. Oh, we're going to start messing around. Oh, we're going to start going for stats. No, make sure the win is in hand.
Teams continuing to jack threes early in the shot clock when they have a big lead in the 4th quarter and just giving the opposition long rebounds and fast breaks and all of these misses, that is so frustrating for me to watch. It's one of the reasons why I can't watch today's product, to be completely honest with you. It is dumb basketball. It's ridiculous. So, Andrew, let's get to the community. So what is the most devastating loss you have had on a basketball video game? Mace, so at King J Mace, says, lost in 2K11 to my classmate and accidentally punched a hole in the living room, which sounds a little bit like Stildo Stildo 33, who's been on the NLC podcast before, because I know that he gets super into the games and super animated as well. But I asked King J Mace, do you remember what teams you were using? And he states, I lost to Rudy Gay in the Grizz. I want to say I had the Spurs. So Rudy Gay is a virtual hardwood legend in my house because of games like NBA 2K11. Those early 2010s NBA 2Ks, Rudy Gay was ridiculous. He could do it all. He was hitting threes. He was attacking the rim and throwing it down on everybody. Just felt like he could score 50 points in any game. I am not surprised that he got schooled by Rudy Gay.
Oh, absolutely. Virtual hardwood legend for sure. But that always stings, doesn't it, when you do have the more powerful team and someone still manages to beat you.
Yeah, that's never fun. At JStash23 states, I think 2K17, Portland versus Memphis, 5 overtimes. Man, I still feel that crap because you asked this. So, 2K17, Portland versus Memphis. So Memphis, once again, involved 5 overtimes. Andrew, that's got to stick.
That reminds me of a couple of our NBA Jam sessions, both Tournament Edition and On Fire Edition, where we're going against the CPU. Actually, it would have been Legends On Fire Edition, I believe, or possibly the 90s edition, I think, was the most recent one, where we had a 2 or 3 overtime game, and the same happened on Tournament Edition as well. Just CPU just coming back, and whenever we thought we had it, there they are hitting that long-range shot at the buzzer at the end of overtime. But yeah, going multiple overtimes and still losing. I mean, it's always special to have overtime in a basketball video game. I feel like, especially when we play against the CPU, the skill of the human user, the gamer, is going to overcome the CPU more often than not and have that decisive win at the end of the fourth quarter there in regulation. So when you have that multiple overtime game, it feels like this epic contest, and then to come out on the losing end, yeah, that's tough.
I guess it depends on how cheesy the game is in favor of the computer, because it felt like every time you and I played like NBA Jam Tournament Edition, for example, they would hit like a full court 3, right, to send it into an overtime. And then they would hit another they would hit another full court 3 to send it into overtime. And then all of a sudden in like a third overtime, you and I can't buy a basket, and they're hitting, they're pulling up from like right inside half court. Yeah. Right. And they're hitting it. So I feel like a game like NBA Jam Tournament Edition, more than often, you're going to get housed by the computer in those situations.
By design. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, by design. But yeah, in most games, I agree with you. I would feel comfortable knowing that I can outsmart the CPU. Right, in those situations. Stasho Bro, so at Nate Stasho, a Live 01 legend, states, every loss to Roger is the most devastating when I have to edit the video after.
Of course.
So that's funny he says that, because I love posting gameplay videos to the NLSC YouTube, but posting a loss hurts sometimes, right? And I do post losses. But, you know, when you and I play co-op and we have a loss against the CPU, or it's my brothers, etc., or I lose to one of my brothers and I post that game, putting that video together is never as fun as if I won or as if we won and whatnot. So I'm sure that his editing sessions are kind of blah, like he said, because I know where he's coming from.
It's that downer ending, isn't it? Yeah. When I had the Lakers versus Celtics 1986 matchup, part of the NBA 2K14 Retro Series, I hit that game winner with Bird. I was obviously elated because game winners are always fun on the virtual hardwood, just as they are in real life. But the fact that I'd played that game and had that fantastic finish, I get to post this game where I've hit a game winner instead of just losing to the CPU. So much more fun that way.
No, 100%. I mean, I had to post my NBA Jam on Fire Edition loss that I had to Stildo 33. Him and I were good friends at the time. And when he hit the game winner with Larry Bird in this game, he was screaming. We were on the phone. He was just screaming about it. He was so excited.
Yes.
But we were playing in the finals of the NLSC tournament, and he was hosting, and I was the guest. And having to post that video to the NLSC YouTube, so everybody could see that I got, a game winner hit on me by Stildo 33. Yeah, that wasn't a fun one to post, but I am glad that I was able to give him that shine, you could say. I'm glad that I was able to post that for him.
I mean, that's just part of competition, right? You accept that if you are competing, you may lose. You don't want to lose. You're certainly going to try to win, but if you lose gracefully.
Exactly. I mean, I did lose gracefully, Him and I are friends, so I did take a couple jabs at him, but overall I did lose gracefully. I know that my games sometimes with my two brothers, they can get heated. There have been times where we got mad at each other and whatnot, even angry with each other. It doesn't happen that often, but it has happened, and that's because we're all competitive. And, when you're playing against each other, it is true competition. So that's pretty natural. Mike P43 at Mike Purchard states, mine would not necessarily be a loss as per se in game, although I've had many tough defeats versus the CPU when a team activates God mode on me, which we were just talking about. That happens in NBA Jam Tournament Edition, for example.
Definitely.
But mine is more of a community loss, and that's that EA stopped making NBA Live and went silent on the fan base with no updates. So he's clearly still upset that EA Sports abandoned the NBA Live series, and in a sense, to him and to a lot of people, they disrespected their loyal player base.
I mean, I feel that. I feel they went with a bad direction with Live 19, as I said it in this very show, of course. Didn't build on that great blueprint, what I feel was a great blueprint with NBA Live 18, capitalized on some momentum, and then just threw it away completely and said, oh yes, we're going to come back strong, we're going to take another year off, we're happy with what we're doing, we're polishing it up, and there's great things to come for a new generation, and then silence, and then apparently abandoning the series. Yeah, I absolutely agree.
Yeah, I still think they're going to come back. I don't know when, but I do believe that the NBA Live series will be revived at some point, and hopefully if that does happen, that they put out a quality product that is as deep as it should be.
Oh yeah, and a PC port too.
So Andrew, let's get to the next community question. I said, Hoopheads, what is the worst basketball video game take you have ever seen or heard? So for me, there have been countless takes, Andrew, that I considered ridiculous as it relates to basketball video games. But the ones that bother me the most are the blanket statements that lack any context. Some examples include, quote, there are microtransactions in many games. Get over it, end quote. Ugh. Which is a shill response that completely avoids the predatory nature of them and the extent of which they are used in the NBA 2K series, and ignores the other gambling mechanics involved in the series as well. Another basketball take that I can't stand, which is another blanket statement, is skating and sliding exists on all basketball video games. Stop acting like it's a new thing, which completely ignores the facts around volume, how often it happens, how dramatically it impacts the look and feel of the game, etc. Another one is the games now look and play the best because technology is at its peak, and we don't go backwards with this stuff. I've seen many variations from that, from shills and whatnot. It's just another BS statement that lacks context, facts, and even oftentimes, Andrew, statistics as it relates to how many people play these new titles and review them positively. Another one, and I know this one bothers you, we've talked about this before, developers saying things along the lines of, if you are not a developer, you will never understand what goes into making a game, patching a game, or fixing a game. Similar lines have been used when a game is being fairly critiqued or at times criticized for poor gameplay mechanics and structure. It's a go-to, Andrew, from what I've seen from several developers, to basically shut down criticism, basically saying, well, you don't know how hard it is to make these games or to make these changes, etc. And they never actually respond to the problem or the critique.
Yeah, I mean, explain the process. Explain if we don't understand, explain and fill in those gaps in our knowledge, those supposed gaps in our knowledge.
Right, exactly. Another one is EA Sports should just take the NBA out of NBA Live and create a strictly online game centered around the one.
Yeah, that'll work.
So, yeah, even though the NBA is the draw, and removing the NBA from NBA Live would be a guaranteed flop. So, Andrew, those are the first items that come to mind for me. What about you?
Well, first of all, I certainly agree with those. Obviously, the microtransactions is a big one. People excusing them, shilling, as you said, saying, oh, they're in old games, you can just not pay, you don't have to pay, it's optional. And as we've said before, when the modes are designed to be less fun, if you don't pay, that is by design to get you to pay, then yes, it's optional, but it's choosing between two very unappealing options, to my mind, absolutely. And as far as technology goes, I mean, I work in IT, Derek. I've seen a lot of new updates come through and brick computers and cause problems. Windows 8 and Windows 8.1 were not necessarily the advancement that people wanted. There's a reason why we've got the Start menu back in Windows 10, and it's there in Windows 11 as well. Not everything that's new is better. Designers make mistakes, sometimes intentionally, once again, designing modes in a way that is trying to force microtransactions and other such decisions, from usually from the suits, obviously. But mistakes are made. Sometimes ideas don't pan out. We've seen a lot of flops. People want to talk about nostalgia, Derek. I remember a lot of the flops growing up. The consoles that were busts, players that were busts. Not everything new is better. It's just the roll of the dice sometimes. Sometimes good ideas don't work out. Sometimes bad ideas are forced upon us. Just the way it goes. Technology, movies, TV shows, video games, they're not universally good or bad. A couple that bug me as a long-time NBA Live fan when people say NBA Live was never good. That is ridiculous. The early NBA Live games were the standard in the sim space. Many of them do hold up. Yes, certainly they show their age because some things do march on. Graphics have gotten better. New control schemes, etc. have been developed. But those games were great in their time. Many of them are still great to revisit today. The other one, of course, NBA Live was an arcade game. NBA Live has gone back and forth as to how much realism it has and how much it kind of tries to balance quote-unquote fun and realism. I mean, I think realism is pretty fun myself, but certainly there is a sliding scale of just how realistic you make it, especially with the default sliders. But NBA Live has never been an arcade game in what I consider to be an arcade game. Whether it's been as realistic as we want or as deep as we want as a sim, that is a totally different question, obviously, but that doesn't make it an arcade game. And also, and this builds off your point about games being better than ever and new always being better, the whole, everybody hates the new game and praises the old game, and it just is this cycle of we forget how much we hated the old game and pretend it was always great.
Right, but that doesn't hold water, Andrew, when it comes to how those games were received at the time and how they're still being talked about today. Right? Like, that's the thing that bothers me, is I've talked about this before with games like NBA 2K17 and 16 and whatnot. If you go on to the NLSC forums or any other forums where there was conversations related around those games, you know, even like on Metacritic, etc., if you go back and look at the feedback on those games, it was far more positive than many of the recent 2Ks. That happened, Andrew. That feedback when that game was new and current happened. The excitement around that game was there. And then people still speak more fondly about those titles today. Those are the facts, right? So I think that that's you heard me talking about like blanket statements earlier, right? Like people just not actually, you know, factoring in context and whatnot and just kind of flying off the cuff with their words and everything. That's how I feel about what you just said. People that say things like, well, everybody's going to complain about the title when it's current, and then when it's not current anymore, they're going to say it's good. Yeah. That is a BS blanket statement that lacks context and lacks facts. I absolutely hate that. I also want to make another point really quick, not to hijack your response, but listen, who's to say that Joe Schmo out there doesn't enjoy NBA Live 2000 more than NBA 2K25?
Sure.
Right? Who's to say that NBA 2K25 is better for everybody than NBA 2K11 just because it's new? Who's to say that NBA 2K5 is better than the original NBA 2K, right? Or let's even go further back, NBA Live 96. Who's going to say that everybody is going to enjoy NBA 2K25 more and say that it's better than NBA Live 96 just because it's a new title? There are people out there that enjoy NBA Live 96 more, right? Yeah. NBA Live 2000, NBA Live 2004, ESPN NBA Basketball, NBA 2K8. We've heard a lot of positive comments about that title recently. NBA 2K13, NBA 2K14. Stop policing everybody. Like when it comes to video games, let people enjoy what they want to enjoy. And if people say that they like a title more than NBA 2K25, if it's a past live title or 2K title or whatever, who are you to say that they're wrong? That's what they enjoy, right? It hits for them. So I just wanted to make those points.
No, that's absolutely right. NBA 2K25 is obviously more technically advanced. It has more features, more depth, better graphics, etc. Is it necessarily more enjoyable to someone on the sticks? That is the
Exactly.
difference. That is the difference.
Exactly. And what do we play the games for, Andrew?
Apparently
Gameplay.
I thought fun. Some people say to be the best in the world or to cheese, but there you go. But like you say, it is a blanket statement. It's ignoring context. It's ignoring specific examples. Look, are there times when people do let nostalgia overtake their opinions? Sure. Recency bias as well also comes into effect there. Two sides of the same coin, as I said in a recent Monday tip-off. But you look at a game like NBA Live 07, Derek. People hated it at the time. People hate it now. For good reason. Then and now. So it's not a case of everything new is always better. Everyone only thinks the previous game was better. Sometimes that is the case. Sometimes that is not the case. Sometimes people have different criteria as to what makes a game better or worse. So it is such a blanket statement. So I absolutely agree there. Bothers me too.
Yeah, I also want to point out too that critiques are okay. And there's trends in these critiques, right?
Sure.
So there's been a lot of people talking about the poor foot planning over the last few years. That's a problem that 2K should probably look at, right? Foot planning. There's been a lot of people talking about how it impacts the actual feel on the court. There were people complaining over the last couple of years about the shooting mechanics, about how the shooting mechanics are not consistent and they're not fair to the gamer. That's something that NBA 2K should look at, right? Like, critiques are okay, people. Like, please critique these games. That's what's supposed to make these games better. That's the pulse, right? So whether, you enjoy it, whether you critique it and whatnot, you're the pulse. So let your voice be heard, but don't try to tell somebody that something should be better for them, right? No, it's not better for them. There's reasons why they don't like it as much. There's reasons why they're not picking it up and whatnot. And there's a reason why they're sticking with something else.
And one final point on that note, no, it's not always a skill issue. Sometimes, yes, and sometimes it is a gamer not wanting to work with the learning curve and to get better at the game, to get good, my favorite saying, Derek. But this whole, it's a skill issue, it's a you issue, no, not always.
No, it's the gameplay doesn't hit, right? The gameplay isn't fun for various reasons. The game doesn't make sense to that person. There are issues that make it more frustrating than fun for them. So yeah, absolutely.
I guess we just suck at NBA Live 07, Derek.
No, NBA Live 07 is pretty much universally hated.
It's NBA Live 07 sucks at NBA Live 07, yeah.
Yeah. Listen, but I will say this, though. If somebody says, hey, listen, I have more fun with NBA Live 07 than I do with, I don't know, NBA 2K17, I'm not going to tell that person, well, you're an idiot. Right? Like, I'm not going to say,
yeah,
dude,
absolutely.
Stop playing. I would be surprised, but I wouldn't be like, dude, stop playing NBA Live 07. That game is terrible. Like, I think it's terrible. It's terrible for me. I think it's universally terrible, right, for most people. But I'm not going to police. Like, if he wants to sit down and have fun with that game, have fun.
Yeah.
Have a blast. I'm glad you're having fun. So let's get to the community responses, Andrew. At Bucky T Gentry states, influencers and even consumers claiming these more recent 2Ks since being on next-gen consoles are the, quote, best 2Ks ever, end quote, during the first week or so of launch. Each and every year is the same hype train for the recent titles, and it's very annoying and cringe. Remember, I called that out and I posted examples of tweets from major influencers, Andrew, where they were like, NBA 2K22 is the best 2K ever. NBA 2K23 is the best 2K ever. NBA 2K24 is the best 2K ever. And it's just like a broken record. So I know what he's talking about. I think that there's definitely that honeymoon stage with new video games. And I think there's a lot of people who are hopeful and even hopeful to a blinding fault, right? Where they're almost blinded by their hope. And then reality hits them a week or two into that release. But at the same time, there's a lot of influencers pushing that, right? There's a lot of people who write reviews for these games that push that language and push that BS. And yeah, it's like a broken record.
And look, we want the latest game to be better than the last, the best ever, preferably. We also want to justify our purchase, obviously. So I totally get it. But not everything new is better than the last thing. We've seen everything make missteps. Technology, sequels to movies, TV shows, video games, obviously. Sometimes mistakes are made. Sometimes new is worse. Not always. Not always. Same way that old is not always better. New is not always better. It's not a universal truth. Again, blanket statements, Derek.
It's also marketing 101. So I just want to point out that I understand that side of it. Like for example, I understand why an influencer would want to try to do that to get clicks. I just don't agree with them doing it. Right. I also agree. I also understand why the company would do that, or even somebody like Ronnie 2K, your favorite, would say something like that in order to drum up hype. Right. I don't agree with them doing it. I think it's just kind of like a filthy way to market sometimes. But at the same time, I understand where it's coming from. I understand the marketing aspect of it, whether it's a company or somebody marketing themselves.
But we don't have to fall for it. We don't have to buy into it. That's my point.
Right. Exactly. Royce states that every NBA 2K release is the GOAT of basketball video games. So he's echoing T. Gentry's thoughts. He says that EA should release a fictional basketball game. So kind of echoing my thoughts about removing NBA from NBA Live. And then he states, and that NBA Live is cooked and that 2K is perfect every release. So, yeah, I mean, he's basically echoed a lot of what we've already said. So, Royce has his finger on the pulse.
Definitely. And I think some people took a lot of pleasure in kicking NBA Live while it was down. And I get it. EA is not a charitable organization, obviously. They have made many blunders from a business and development standpoint. But we're seeing the result of one company having a monopoly. And it's not like EA themselves didn't provide an example of this with Madden, what a monopoly will do to sports games. So people are realizing, we actually do need that competition, and we're seeing more people saying, we need NBA Live back, and I love to see it. I don't want to get too hung up on, where were you years ago, and we were saying this first, but, kind of, Derek, we were saying this a long time, and we knew this. We were ahead of the curve here.
EA Sports has royally screwed up the NBA Live franchise over the last 18 years.
Yeah.
They've really messed it up hardcore. They made so many mistakes, so many cancels, so many restarts, so many blundered restarts. Just like they have just messed up so bad, and they deserve criticism for that. They deserve to be critiqued. But at the same time, I think that most consumers, whether they admit it or not, would love another option in the space. So whether it's EA Sports bringing back NBA Live or another company jumping into the fray, which I can't believe another company hasn't jumped in yet. I'd like to see it.
That's the big picture. The big picture thinking we're always talking about.
Exactly. Mike P for 3 at Mike Purchard states, quote, NBA Live is trash and EA should stop competing with 2K and just stop making this game, end quote. He continues, it was the NBA video game market having two titles to choose from that pushed one or the other to evolve, to begin to be great or greater than the competition. Now with only 2K, they can do what they want. It's led to greed and 2K stopping listening to the whole community about every area of the game. 2K used to be humble, but now act like the wolf of Wall Street. So, he doesn't like the cocky nature of the 2K series. The people on social media that represent NBA 2K, the way they talk about their games, oftentimes the way they talk about their consumer base, etc. He's also kind of balking at the idea that we shouldn't have a competitor in the space, right? Like the people that are stating that NBA Live should just never come back because they can't compete with 2K.
I think a lot of people have made 2K too much of their personality. And I do get that, because I was such a fan of NBA Live growing up. That did make it very difficult for me to accept other games. I never said, they shouldn't exist, but I just had a hard time getting into their style of gameplay, their control concepts, etc. I've talked about isomotion not really appealing to me, and it's funny that 2K6 has become such a retroactive favorite, because it does have those problems with the dribbling system, but I do understand being loyal to a brand and sometimes loyal to a fault. But yeah, a lot of people make 2K and 2K success, especially influencers here obviously, but certainly a lot of gamers as well, a lot of people just buying the game, too much of their personality.
Yeah. I think that the majority of that is caused by the height of social media.
Absolutely.
The chase for clout, the chase for subscribers, the chase for followers, the chase for attention. I think that's the biggest driver in that, and it is unfortunate.
Dunking on someone and something as well, that you can punch down on something.
Exactly. So Andrew, we're going to end this show with another community question. So I asked Hoopheads, what is the worst basketball take you have ever seen or heard? So I'll start this off. I can't even pick one. Andrew. There are so many bad takes about hoop today that it would be impossible to cover them all or pick one that stands out as the worst. I will say that Lou Williams recently stating that Karl Anthony Towns was more skilled than Jokic was pretty stupid. Also, Spencer Dinwiddie a few years ago saying that Michael Jordan would be Terrence Ross athletically in today's NBA. It doesn't get much dumber than that. Or Gilbert Arenas stating that Scottie Pippen and Dennis Rodman would be small guards in today's NBA, and that Russell Westbrook was the same size as Anthony Mason. I mean, how off could you be? Like, how ridiculous could you be, Andrew? Him also taking countless shots at Stockton, who outplayed him when Stockton was pushing 40. Arenas is an idiot and a useful media mouthpiece. He gets attention with his takes. It's unfortunate. Or Anthony Edwards stating that Michael Jordan was the only skilled player of his era, disregarding the countless talents that were in the NBA at the time. Imagine saying that Hakeem Olajuwon wasn't skilled, Andrew.
Yeah.
But according to him, he wouldn't know that because he didn't watch, but he still made that statement. Most of the terrible takes that come to mind are actually from former or current players. But there are obviously other takes around analytics, quote unquote, evolution, and just BS about the overall state of athletes in basketball in general. But again, you know, if I covered all the dumb takes that I've heard, I would be here all day.
Oh, yeah. And I, too, am generally bothered by the disrespect for the past. As we've said before, that was not a thing when we were growing up. We were taught to respect the history of the game, to take an interest in the greats of the past, and certainly to respect their accomplishments. Did we consider the current era to be the best? We did, but we argued why it was better, not that the old days were weak or terrible. And the funny thing is that obviously LeBron James is now the new all-time leading scorer in the regular season, surpassing Kareem. But if you talk about the old era as being weak and not being competitive and not real athletes and so forth, then that is diminishing his accomplishments as well, because that was a record set, if you follow that logic, in a weaker era. So for him to surpass that, you know, it's not as impressive. So by lowering the bar, they're actually also doing a disservice to the current game as well. So I really think it's ridiculous. It just goes to show, you look at the NBA at 75 was nothing like the NBA at 50 celebrations. I don't just say that because of nostalgia, but when you spend a decade or so talking down the past, and then you say, hey, let's celebrate a big anniversary, a big milestone of the league, it doesn't hit the same because you've spent so long disrespecting that past.
Well, a few things. One, human evolution doesn't work that way.
Of course.
Athletic evolution doesn't work that way. Players in 97, 98 were not somehow inferior to players in 03, 04 or 05, 06 or 09, 10. That is not the way it works. In fact, there's players that were equally or more successful who started their careers in 97, 98, you know, in the mid 2000s and whatnot, in the late 2000s. It makes absolutely no sense. But what it does is it promotes the current product. It promotes it as the best. It promotes the current stars. It drums up drama. It drums up debate. It gets clicks and whatnot. So there's so many reasons why it's done, but when you actually look at the context around it, it absolutely makes no sense, and it's complete BS. I also want to point out that when I was younger, you know, I was on the basketball team in high school and whatnot, you know, my friends who were basketball players, the friends that I played pickup with, we actually never did that, Andrew. We never said, well, this era is so much better. We actually never even said this era was, the era at the time was better. In fact, I hardly ever remember us comparing, to be completely honest with you. There was never a conversation where it was never like Steve Francis was better than Earl Monroe, right?
Yeah.
Or like Earl Monroe couldn't do the things that Steve Francis could do and stuff like that. We didn't even have those conversations. And even the early days of the internet, the early days of forums, the early days of access in that regard, I didn't see those conversations. I didn't remember those conversations ever happening. In fact, the first time when I ever really noticed this stuff taking off when they were crapping on the past in order to promote the current and everything, I want to say it was probably the mid or early 2010s.
Yes.
That's when I
Pretty
really
much.
first saw it like taking off. And what also happened around that time? It was the start of these ridiculous debate shows, right? It was the start of super height of social media. It was really the start of everything online as it relates to influence really taking off, and where the drama really took off and everything. And it's just absolutely ridiculous.
Oh, for sure. I can't stand it, as we've said before. Also, usual things like Tim Duncan is boring, Tim Duncan is overrated because he's not flashy, things like that, always kind of indicates people who don't really know hoop.
Oh, of course not. I think that honestly, the large majority of comments that you see from people online and whatnot, they're just parroting what they see on these debate shows, right? They're parroting what they see from influencers. They're parroting former players, like ones that I just mentioned, who just like, oh, MJ would be just Terrence Ross in today's NBA and stuff like that. I think the problem is that there's a lot of people out there that actually don't understand basketball. I think that there's a lot of people out there that don't know basketball history as well. And the combination of them not knowing basketball very well and not knowing basketball history and listening to all of these influencers and whatnot and these media mouthpieces and these former players, they're going to parrot those stupid takes. They're going to keep repeating those stupid takes, and it gains traction. Unfortunately, these sites and accounts that repeat this stuff and come up with this stuff in order to get clicks, they are a detriment to the sport. They're a detriment to the history of the game. They're incredibly disrespectful, etc. So, yeah, I completely agree. I think one of the biggest problems is that today's NBA, today's basketball landscape is far more about entertainment as opposed to competition, right? I think that it's the whole design of today's NBA is to get as many people to watch as possible, regardless of the quality of the product, which is why you see them driving up scores, handicapping defense, all of that stuff. You see all the, players on social media and talking about the players' fit more than how they performed in the game, et cetera. I really believe that the NBA has moved way too far away from actual competition and, real basketball, and moved into the scope more of social media entertainment.
Oh, I feel that. That's very obvious. Absolutely. Also agree that analytics have become too much of a focus on the conversation. People really focusing on numbers over context, over results. Okay, this player had a very efficient game. Did they do the things they needed to do in crunch time? Did this efficient performance actually impact the game the way it's supposed to? Did it actually have a positive impact at the end of the day? You only know this from watching the game and seeing how they were performing at different times. You can have a very efficient performance, but not really come through in the clutch, for example, not really do anything. You're not doing anything statistically to lower the efficiency, but you're also not performing to the best of your ability or actually impacting the team positively. And absolutely, as far as focusing on flash over substance as well, to my point before about Tim Duncan calling him boring and so forth, you see players do it this fancy dribbling, certainly, and it's under control and it's flashy, but it doesn't do anything. The move doesn't actually achieve anything. It doesn't create space. They just dribble it between their legs a bunch of times and make a move that's, okay, that's great, that's under control, that's kind of flashy, but it doesn't actually elude the defender. It doesn't create space, and you just chuck up a shot and miss it. The result is bad, and that is still celebrated. Oh, look at this move. Yeah, I can see it. I can see that he's got some skill, but it's not doing anything. The skill is not being put to good use. So that focus on flash over substance. And, obviously we love flash, we love flair. We grew up watching 80s and 90s basketball that was certainly about flash and flair, and the players were producing highlights, and we loved it. But they were still moving with purpose. They were still making moves with purpose, with a goal in mind, to elude defenders, to get the bucket, not just to be flashy, not just to make a highlight reel. That's something that has to come in the flow of the game.
A couple things. The highlights aren't better today. I think you would agree.
Oh, yeah.
So they can say that all they want. They can try to say that players today are more skilled and whatnot. I get bored with today's highlights. I think there's way too many walks into the paint. There's players not, dunking in traffic as much. There's not as many contests at the rim. It doesn't feel as much like I'm watching true competition. It feels like I'm watching, with a lack of a better term, half-ass effort, especially on the defensive end. I see that defenses most of the time are handicapped by the rules, which also hurts the ability to create authentic highlights and whatnot. I don't see as many athletes as far as overall great athletes on the teams in today's NBA. It's a lot of people who really can't get off the ground well, but they can shoot threes, right? They can stretch the floor. So, and they're small. Like the NBA has moved to small ball in a big way. You see lineups being trotted out there with 6'6", 6'7", 6'8" centers and whatnot. And a lot of the bigs are hanging out beyond the 3-point line. Right. And I think that it's a huge myth that the game is more high flying than ever, that it's more athletic than ever. Sure, the pace is fast, but tell me that these highlights and tell me that these athletes are better overall than what we grew up with. Right. Or what was in the early and mid 2000s and late 2000s and whatnot. I just don't see it. So I agree with that. I also think with as far as analytics go, nerds taking over the sport in that way, I think was incredibly detrimental to the NBA. I'm not trying to be mean by saying nerds, but what I mean is numbers nerds who are not paying attention to the actual on-court action, to the actual impact of that player, not being able to distinguish and separate what's actually happening on the floor and the true impact of that player from the plus minus and, usage rate and the efficiency advanced statistics, et cetera. So I think that that's definitely hurt the sport. They're trying to turn basketball in a way, numbers wise, into baseball,
yes.
Right? Because baseball, for the most part, is all about numbers, right? That's what baseball's been like. People love the stats in baseball. And what they've done is they've put the focus so much on stats in the NBA that it's taken away from the actual on-court product.
Well, I think it's led to what we can basically call box score watchers. People just reading the box scores and making up takes based on that. And you could see a player score 40 points, get a 40-point triple-double, and shoot a good percentage and just a few turnovers. Pretty good stats in the box score. But again, the person who watched the game saw that player be tentative in the fourth quarter, miss all of the shots they took in the fourth quarter. All of their turnovers, or a majority of them, came in that fourth quarter. When their team needed them to come through, they were not putting up stats. They were not making the right plays. At the end of the game, you look at the box score, the line looks good because through the first three quarters, they had themselves a game. But when it came to the fourth quarter, when it came to crunch time and executing with the game on the line, and when it matters most, and to finish the game and play that fourth quarter out and get the W, they didn't come through. But if you're just looking at the box scores, you don't know that. And that is where a lot of the takes are coming from, just based on those numbers. And it's all part of that analytics and box score watches. Also
with the Angel Reese and LeBron stuff, right? With as far as stat padding when you're down,
sure.
Right? That's been highlighted heavily. And, you see a team go down by 16 to 20 points, sometimes more, and the game is out of reach. And you see, certain players, two of which I just named, feverishly going for stats, feverishly attacking the rim, feverishly going for rebounds and whatnot, and trying to pad their assists, etc. And sure, at the end of the game, that player may have 24 points, 10 rebounds, and 8 assists, but half of that or more was when it didn't matter. Right.
That too, yeah.
And what ended up happening is earlier in the game, they were actually a net negative for their team as far as on-court performance. They were turning the ball over. They weren't able to create a positive difference on the offensive end. They weren't finding the open man. They had a poor field goal percentage, et cetera. But at the end of the day, their stats look good, right? So that's why I hate it. And but unfortunately, the focus is heavily on analytics and stats today. So before we get to the community responses, though, did you have any other takes you wanted to mention?
I think that pretty much covers it for me. It really is the disrespecting of the past, the focus on stats out of context, and just a lack of context in general. Like I said, praising a fancy move that does absolutely nothing. ignoring so many of the great players through history, distilling the debate down to 2 or 3 players, usually just 2, obviously, and not celebrating history as we should. Like I said, there's a reason that the NBA at 50 celebrations were much more exciting than the 75th anniversary celebrations, because we've spent so long downplaying the past, and it just doesn't hit the same.
I agree. So let's get to the community responses. Again, the question was, what is the worst basketball take you have ever seen or heard? Stasho Bro at Nate Stasho, so Live 01 legend, he states that losing in the NBA Finals is worse than not making the finals. I definitely agree with that. I mean, if you can take your team all the way to the NBA Finals, that is an impressive feat. But I will say that not all finals appearances and all championships are created equal. I think that there can be a discussion on which ones were harder, how the path went, who you faced, what conference you were in, etc. For example, Toronto Raptors with Kawhi Leonard, they won that NBA championship. Excellent for that franchise and whatnot. But pretty much everybody on the Warriors was down in that finals due to injuries. And I know you can only play who is in front of you, but as far as enjoyment watching, as far as level of competition, as far as, who was out on the floor, that is a massive difference to some of the NBA Finals battles that we've seen in the past. And these are all my opinions on this. Also, the Celtics, who had a relatively easy path in comparison to pretty much every NBA team in NBA history getting to the NBA Finals last season. Sure, it's my local team. The Boston Celtics won the championship. But if you want to have that conversation about, would they have been able to do that in the Western Conference? Would they have been able to, with this team, do that exact same thing, in prior years when the conference was tougher or the teams were better, et cetera? I would debate that they couldn't, right? Talented team. That's just the way I feel about it. When people talk about LeBron's runs to the NBA Finals, the Eastern Conference was historically weak for most of them, and that's well documented, right? And so you have to wonder that would that streak even exist if he had been in the Western Conference during that time? So those conversations can happen. There's context around every situation like this, and I think that those can kind of be fun debates. But I will agree with you. Obviously, making the finals is better than, being knocked out in the first round or not making the playoffs, etc. I think that's pretty obvious.
I mean, I agree. And like you say, context is important. But I would also point out that winning in the finals is more impressive than simply making it as well. That's something that people, kind of downplay. And often it's brought up with LeBron, 10 finals, 4 wins, 6 losses, and they mention the amount of finals appearances consecutively and overall. I mean, you look at Magic Johnson, 5 titles in 9 appearances. Kareem, 6 in 10. Bill Russell, 11 in 12 appearances in 13 years. So when you make these arguments about players, they need to apply to everyone, and they often don't. And basically being circular reasoning that they're making these arguments, so they have to apply to everybody, and context is important, once again.
Yeah, and I'm going to make an example, too, about what I stated about the run to the finals and whatnot. Are you really going to tell me that the Celtics run last year with the teams that they played and the injuries that were on those teams as well and whatnot is as impressive as the Dallas Mavericks in 2011 taking out Portland, then taking out the Lakers, who were the defending champs with, Kobe, Pa, etc.
In a sweep.
Then taking in a sweep, and then taking out the Thunder with Russell Westbrook, James Harden, and Kevin Durant and Serge Ibaka, and then taking out the big three Heat, with LeBron, Wade, and Bosh. You're going to tell me that those runs are equal? See, that's where I think there can be debate, and I don't think that the Celtics even get out of the Western Conference there with this group of players and whatnot. So it's hard for me to just say, well, they won the championship. All championships are equal. It's hard for me to say that.
I mean, a lot of talking heads talk about how some championships are supposedly worth more than others. There are some people that argue that the 2020 championship in the bubble is worth 2 rings. I think at the end of the day that's very silly, but people are making those arguments, so your argument is just as valid. In fact, your argument is more valid, I would say. Because you have better reasoning behind yours.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but context matters. That's just the way it is. What I will say again though is you can only play who's in front of you. It's not the Celtics' fault
Of
that
course.
that happened. I just think the product today, actually overall, and I've said it on past podcasts, I think it's incredibly watered down. I think that there's a lack of stars and superstars in today's NBA. I think there's a lot of players who play the same. I think analytics has certainly hurt the sport as well. But this stuff is happening at the youth level. It's happening at the high school level. It's happening at the college level. I can't even watch college basketball anymore. But I think that there's just an overall blah feeling
Mm.
to today's NBA and the players and the teams, etc. So that obviously adds to this for me as well. I just don't think the basketball on the floor is quality the majority of the time. So the next response, Andrew, was Stephen at the Live King. He states, all the talk surrounding Jokic saying he didn't deserve 3-time MVP nod, bad takes on Jokic all around, and he has proven everyone wrong. Yeah, Lou Williams on a recent podcast, like I stated earlier, stating that Karl Anthony Towns was more skilled. That, coming from a former player, by the way, which we've talked about this before, just because somebody played in the NBA doesn't mean they have good takes, right? That is absolutely stupid to say. Jokic is far more skilled than Karl Anthony Towns on a basketball court. And that's pretty insulting, actually, for him to say that. And I believe he tried to backtrack his comments the next day or the day after and whatnot. And yeah, I mean, you look at what Jokic was able to do with that Nuggets team. That Nuggets team has never been, a super team. There's never been heavy recruiting on the Nuggets side to get superstars there and whatnot. They rolled with what they had for the most part, and he has just been the most valuable by far on that team. Without him on that team isn't a playoff team, right? That's the way I look at that Nuggets squad. He is that impactful for that team, so I definitely agree.
Yeah, I mean, I understand wanting to argue for another player and champion another player and what they're doing, but yeah, I don't agree at all with the disrespect of Jokic there.
Right. And I mean, he does have good pieces around him. I mean, he does have Aaron Gordon, Jamal Murray's a heck of a player. We've talked about that before. Michael Porter Jr. is no slouch. So they definitely have good pieces, but there's no doubt in my mind that he is the most valuable player in the NBA over the last few years, because if you take him off the team, what happens? Right. So I agree with the Live King there.
I mean, Larry Bird had a pretty good team when he was a three-time MVP, a three-peat MVP, in fact, in the 80s, had a pretty good Celtics team around him. But again, you take Bird off that team, the heart and soul of that team, the leader, he was the MVP at the end of the day. There are very few MVPs that haven't had some good pieces around them, but they are still worthy of that award.
I will say that Larry Bird had better teams than Jokic here. As far as I think Larry Bird is better than Jokic. And that's not just me being a Celtics fan. When I watch both of them play, Bird floors me overall. But some of the teams that Bird had with Parrish, McHale, DJ, Ainge, and whatnot, never had super strong benches and whatnot. But McHale could score 25, 30 a night. Right. He was that dominant in the post. Barkley said he was the best player that he ever played against, etc. And Robert Parrish was excellent even before he came to Boston with Golden State. In fact, putting some of his best numbers up with Golden State. Excellent two-way player, amazing at running the floor, etc. And DJ had won a title before he came to Boston. He was an excellent floor general, had that mid-range pull-up, super disciplined defender, could guard multiple positions, etc. So I think that Larry probably had an overall better team than what Jokic has had, but there's also context. I think that there were better teams often in the NBA back then when Bird was playing, right?
Too, yeah.
And what he had to go up against, when he was going up against Magic's Lakers and Irving Sixers, and just the, Ralph Sampson and Hakeem Olajuwon in the NBA Finals in 1986, and Lewis Lloyd on that team as well. So I think that overall the NBA was loaded and there were less teams as well back then. And I think that Larry probably had better competition than Jokic. So you have to factor that in as well. But I agree with the Live King about Jokic. T Gentry at Bucky T states Anthony Edwards is the next MJ, and they list 2 laughing faces. Nothing taken away from the kid's game, but will never be close to MJ. Yeah, I don't like that comparison because I don't think that Edwards is as quick as Jordan was. I don't think he's anywhere even close to his dynamic going to the rim. I don't think he's as dynamic in the mid-range. He has probably 5% of the post game that Michael Jordan had, if that, and whatnot. So, and I don't think that he's anywhere close on the defensive end to MJ. So, I don't like that comparison either. But you know what? The fans have run with it. The media runs with it, and because of that, there was actually conversation around it. So that's unfortunate.
Well, I will say that he's closer to MJ than Deshaun Stevenson. If you go back to that NBA DraftNet profile back in the day. So there is that.
Gilbert's great. Says, this one will probably take several podcast episodes if we were to go through the number of horrible takes on this app. But at the top of my head, here are a few. Horace Grant was a top 10 player in the 90s. Pippen was the second best player in the 90s. And Jordan couldn't go left. I mean, enough said, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Horace Grant was an excellent piece to those championship teams, and he was good on the Orlando Magic when he went over there as well. But if anybody argues that he was a top 10 player in the 90s, not only do they not know their basketball history, they probably have an agenda, right? There's probably a reason why they're making that ridiculous claim, and it's definitely not in good faith. Pippen being the second best player in the 90s is, once again, it's not in good faith. Right? It's more than likely a lack of knowledge of that era and all the great players that were in that era. I mean, if you try to tell me that Pippen was better than Akeem Olajuwon, or even Patrick Ewing or Karl Malone, and the list goes on, I think that you are sadly mistaken and probably don't know what you're talking about. And then the Jordan couldn't go left thing. I'm not even going to get into that because that's ridiculous.
The footage speaks volumes there, where people have shown him going left many times and finishing. Yeah, that's just one of those things that it sounds like a gotcha. It sounds like it's really good. Aha, but this is what they don't want you to know because it's not actually factual. And I remember some people back in the 90s saying, "Oh, Pippen might be the second best on the Bulls, but that also might make him the second best in the league." So that take has actually been around for a long time. It's always been hyperbolic, obviously, but yeah, like you, I certainly disagree with that.
Gilbert Great continued with, Stockton would be a role player in today's league. Embiid is better than Hakeem Olajuwon. Draymond would lock up Shaq. Malik Monk does Jordan's acrobatic layups every game. Yeah, I mean, we would be here all day. Andrew, Embiid doesn't even move close to as fluid as Hakeem. He doesn't have as many moves. He doesn't have as many ways to create his own shot. He's not half the defender Hakeem was. That's ridiculous. Stockton being a role player in today's league, even though he was locking up and outplaying young 20s Gilbert Arenas, who everybody said in the mid-2000s was one of the best players in the league. Give me a break. Not only one of the best players, but one of the strongest guards and better athletes, too, in the NBA. If you're saying that Stockton would be a role player in today's league, you don't know your history and you don't know basketball. Draymond would lock up Shaq. Yeah, okay. Like, Shaq would absolutely embarrass Draymond. Draymond has trouble playing as a big guy oftentimes in the paint. If you watch those games, he doesn't play strong oftentimes. Oftentimes he's using his hands more than his body and whatnot. I see that matchup going sideways. I feel like Shaq would absolutely dominate Draymond, and Malik Monk doing. So that's the other thing. So you see one athletic layup in today's NBA, and what do? They automatically compare it to Jordan. That just shows you how great Jordan was, right? He's the topic of discussion whenever a current player makes an acrobatic layup. And it's like every single acrobatic layup that an NBA player makes now, they state, yeah, and they said that Jordan was great for doing this. Meanwhile, you're highlighting that acrobatic layup because you think it's great, right? Like the one that had just happened in today's NBA, you're saying it's a great layup and you're saying that Jordan was doing it. So that you're just complimenting Jordan there, right? And the other piece on that too is Jordan was doing that stuff all the time. You see a player now do one of those layups and you act like it's being done all the time, and that player does it all the time. And oftentimes the layup that they show isn't comparable to so many that Jordan did all the time too. So yeah, I agree with that one as well. Royce says, how much room have you got? His Airness had no left hand. Charles Barkley was an average or fringe player. Dennis Rodman would be unplayable in today's game. Wilt, Bill, Shaq, Moses, Dream, and other great centers would be undrafted and unplayable. The endless dumb GOAT debate. Also, that whole plumbers and firemen take was and is worthless. You know, that's one of Andrew's favorite to crap on. But yeah, no, I definitely agree with all of those takes. The endless GOAT debate where somehow Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, even a guy like Kobe Bryant, Bill Russell, Wilt Chamberlain, all of these guys have somehow been pushed aside and not been allowed to be part of the discussion by all of media, all the media, the talking heads, the major influencers, etc. Those guys have somehow over the years been pushed out, and they made it between two players, and one current and one past. And I've said why I think they do that. It's to promote the current product, right? Number one. Number two, to cater to short attention spans and make everybody feel part of the conversation. And it's kind of worked. I think it's hurt the sport in a big way. I think it's hurt, discussion around the history of the game. But yeah, it's worked. It's made everybody feel like they can be part of the conversation.
Oh yeah, it absolutely has poisoned the discourse. And it is funny, not ha-ha funny, obviously, how quickly they've discarded Kobe after pumping him up for so many years, and understandably so. Of course, when he died tragically, they did talk him up again, and then really grossly, this still bothers me today, talk about bad takes, Derek, when they made that part of the Lakers 2020 championship, the legacy, doing it for Kobe, and making that part of LeBron's legacy. Kobe was not the only person to pass away in that tragic accident, I'll just put it out there, but making that accident about another player's legacy, I think is one of the grossest things that NBA media has done in recent years.
When that happened, it didn't surprise me.
Oh, no.
Nothing surprises me anymore with basketball coverage, with NBA coverage, with the way current players act, right? The way current players use their platforms, etc. Nothing surprises me anymore. Mike P for 3, so at Mike Pritchard states that LeBron James is the GOAT over MJ. And he states, to the old heads, this doesn't need explaining in depth, but to keep it short, MJ never lost in the finals. He played in an era that was more physical and harder to score, while LBJ played in a league that rules made it in the players' favor. Yeah, I'm not going to get into the LeBron MJ debate because I absolutely hate it. I think it's absolutely stupid. I think that the talking points around it are really dumbed down. Like, basketball conversation has really been dumbed down, especially when it comes to this quote-unquote GOAT debate. So, yeah, I'm not going to get into that, but yeah, at Mike Pritchard has MJ as the GOAT.
Yeah, I'm sure people can guess my stance on the matter. I have mentioned it before, and yeah, there's a lot of bad takes in that discussion. And again, it comes down to putting down the past and not lifting up the present. If you do want to champion LeBron or Kobe or someone else as the GOAT, explaining why they're better and, well, the past was great, but this is why the present is greater, or this is why the next generation is greater, I think that would be a more compelling argument. I think it would be a more respectful argument, but sadly, that is not the way discourse has gone. So, yeah, I'm with Mike on that one.
I'll just say this to our audience. When it comes to the GOAT debate, stop thinking that it's two players. I'm not saying that the NLSC audience is like this, but basketball fans in general. Look at the other players. Research those other players that I mentioned. Don't just look at their numbers, which their numbers are obviously excellent, Andrew. But look at the footage. Look at the teams they played. Look at how the league was when they played. Look at what they accomplished. So that's all I'm going to say about that. And then Adam Howard states, mate, there's a new one every day on here. So he's talking about bad basketball takes. Yeah. I try to stay out of it on social media, Andrew, but yeah, there's bad takes every single day.
Yeah, shout out to the people who do engage with them and push back and put good arguments out there. Sometimes it feels like a losing cause, obviously. If nothing else, it lets me know some of the accounts to mute Derek, so I don't want to see them come up in my timeline and see that nonsense. Just want to curate my feed to get those great highlights, to see good discussion, not some of this horrible discussion. Obviously, Instagram is terrible. Maybe no surprise there, because it's mostly just posting pictures, obviously, and so it's not necessarily a forum, a discussion forum in the traditional sense, as other social media platforms are. But yeah, pretty much any social media platform, including Reddit, and probably including some forum somewhere, have these bad takes, obviously.
So before we close, Andrew, I wanted to give a shout out to a funny take from Thundershack on our Discord. He stated, seeing S. Pippen in a 2024 Bulls game box score is a bit trippy. And what he was referring to was the Memphis Grizzlies played the Chicago Bulls. The Grizzlies won 142 to 131. But in the standouts of the game, they showed their stats below that score, and it's S. Pippen, playing for Memphis, of course, but it says S. Pippen, 30 points, 10 assists in 2 rebounds. The only thing I'll say about that is Pippen may have had a few more rebounds than 2 in that game. But yeah, it is weird seeing S. Pippen in 2024 and during a Bulls game.
Absolutely. Kind of like seeing Patrick Ewing Jr. or Glenn Rice Jr., indeed Tim Hardaway Jr. as well. Seeing the sons of players we grew up watching is definitely trippy. And yeah, a Pippen going against the Bulls in 2024. Very weird indeed. But thank you once again to everybody who responded to Derek's prompts. We love having this conversation with you each and every week. And Derek, we vow that we will always do our best to give good takes, not bad ones.
Absolutely. And we'll expand too. If you want us to expand on anything we brought up on today's show, right? Like any of the discussion topics, if you want, any of our takes, etc., let us know in the YouTube comments when this episode is uploaded, and we can expand if you would like. We've always been very passionate about basketball, not just the virtual hardwood, but real hoop as well. So we have some pretty strong opinions.
Indeed. And as always, please keep the conversation going. With that being said, that has brought us to the end of this week's show. As always, thank you for tuning in, and please join us again next week and every week on the NLSC, nba-live.com, our YouTube channel, or wherever you listen to podcasts. In the meantime, make sure you're following us on social media. That's where you can get in touch with us, and of course, stay up to date with all of our content. So Derek, go ahead and plug the handles.
Yeah, you can reach me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at D43G and at D4384. I'm also on the NLSC, D43, and on YouTube, D43.
As for me, I'm Andrew in the forum and Andrew NLSC on X. The NLSC is on X and Facebook at the NLSC. We're also NLSC Basketball on Instagram and Threads. We're on YouTube at NBA Live Series Center. And of course, keep it locked to the NLSC itself, nba-live.com, for everything we do for basketball video games. So, thank you once again for tuning in, and until next time, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Derek.
Go get buckets, everyone.